touch on as much as I can as we go through. And then what's your mission? What's your why? Why do you do the things you do? Why do you play soccer? What makes you get out of bed, especially right now with life changing so much? What gets you out of bed in the morning to study or to still do some soccer training? Just think about those kind of things, just to kind of get you in the right mindset as we move into this presentation. So with that, we all know about dynamic warm-ups for practice. You might jog, you might stretch. We're going to do a little bit of that today just to practice some visualization before we get into the nitty-gritty. So do me a favor, everybody just close your eyes and take a deep breath. Feel the floor beneath your feet. Focus on your breath. Feel your lungs expand and slowly retract. Take 3 more slow breaths for me. Keeping your eyes closed, and now that you're settled, imagine you're in the middle of a soccer field. You're the only person around. The stands are empty. You have a ball resting in the grass next to you. Colorado blue skies stretch above you as far as you can see. Take that in for a moment. Smell the freshly cut grass, tickle your nose. Listen for the crunch of the grass under your cleats as you shift your weight side to side. Feel the breeze blowing against your skin, the warmth of the sun hitting your face. Take a deep breath. Begin dribbling the ball. Feel the sensation you feel when the ball makes contact with your foot. You're moving toward the goal. Begin dribbling a little faster. Feel your heart rate start to increase. Lift your head. See the goal in front of you. As you approach the goal, pick a spot in the back of the net you want to hit. Once you reach shooting distance, take a step, plant your foot, feel your leg and your core muscles tighten. When you're ready, make contact with the ball. See it hit the back of the net. Hear the swish of the ball against the net. And then take a deep breath and open your eyes. So how was that? There's probably some parts of that you felt like were super vivid and super real and you could relate to it. There's probably some parts you were like, yeah, that's not for me. Thinking about what you just experienced, were you watching yourself on the field go through the dribbling and the shooting? Or were you someone sitting in the stands, like seeing your body physically moving on the field? That's a good first step to thinking about how you visualize things the most effectively. And so keep that in mind as we move forward. Just either way, whether it's you in first person being the athlete or whether it's you watching yourself, that's what we call third person. Just think about that moving forward so that when we start to talk about writing your own imagery scripts, you know what works best for you and just what you naturally do. Alrighty, so moving on. What's our plan? What's our plan for the next hour of us being in this virtual group? We're going to go through what visualization imagery actually are. How does our brain work jointly with our body to basically produce better performances? And then how obviously does that brain and body connection ultimately improve your performance? I'm sure you're wondering, how do you develop those imagery scripts? What I just went through was just a simple one. It's a good basic place to start. But at the end, I want you to be able to write your own to make sure that you get the most out of this for you specifically as possible. And then how and when do you implement this into your training plan? Something to think about is we do a lot of physical work in our sports, but sometimes the mental work that it takes to take you to that next level sometimes gets overlooked. And so what I like to think about is this is actual mental training. So you're training your brain. You're training your brain to help you physically on the field or in practice or in really whatever else you do in life. So we look at this as more the mental training side of things versus the physical part. All right. So what is imagery and what's visualization? Sometimes you hear this, these two words used interchangeably. When we think of imagery, the technical terms of it, it involves all five senses. When we think of visualization, it's actually the images that you create in your mind. Thankfully, we all create images. So you all imagine things, whether you realize it or not, and you're practicing imagery, whether you realize it or not some days. But for the sake of simplicity, I will probably use these words interchangeably. And so whatever it is that you have in your mind of what you think visualization imagery are, stick with that just to hopefully help you understand it a little bit better. So the definition: process of stimulating sensory experiences in the mind in the absence of external stimuli. So what does that mean? There's a lot of big words in there. Basically, it's your brain being able to carry out specific skills with your body in a resting position. In a minute, we'll talk about why that is so important for your brain to actually be able to do those things, because it helps you, it helps you actually develop the processes in your mind that you need on the field. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But similar to your physical skills, your mental skills have to be practiced. If you think about the amount of times you spend on the practice field in preparation for games, it's not that the physical and the mental preparation need to equal, but there should be some amount of time set aside to practice some of this, the mental training part, so that you get the reps of it and you can improve that skill as well. So what is the mind and body connection? When you actually sit there, and you may have experienced this in the example we did in the beginning, when you visualize yourself performing a skill, you actually activate neurons in your brain that would fire when you would physically do an activity. They've done studies where people are literally sitting down and thinking about, running and kicking, and the muscles that you would use to run and kick are actually being activated in their legs and their arms and their core at the same time. So there's a lot of science behind this, but it is pretty cool to think about. I can literally sit here and practice things in my mind that will help transfer my skills on the field. So when your mind develops these new pathways, it basically begins to function in a way that it would if you had already practiced the skill that you were thinking about. So similar to physical skills, you need the repetitions. You still need the repetitions of mentally seeing yourself performing these activities in order to see the ultimate benefits on the field that's going to improve your performance. There's a really fancy term that if you want to Google it, you are absolutely welcome to, but it's called the psychoneuromuscular theory. So basically, it's how the brain and the muscles connect and the neurological connection that happens between. It's pretty cool. If you have extra time right now, since school's out, it's kind of fun to read about and just see how much power our mind really has. So we're going to take a minute and review where we are. That's basically the same slide that I had in the beginning to say where we were going. My hope at this point is that you understand what visualization is and what imagery is, and then starting to understand how the brain and the body can work together. If anyone has any questions at any point in time, please don't hesitate. I haven't seen any pop up, but I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so if anyone has questions so far, please type them in. If not, we will keep on rolling. So ultimately, why do we use it? Sometimes you hear athletes or skiers. If you've seen a ski race on TV, usually you see the skiers at the top of the gates before they go down the hill, and they're literally moving their body, and they're actually going through an imaginary race where they know where their turns are and they know where their gates are to make turns. That's a good example that I think most of us have probably seen at some point in time of an athlete in real time using this. So why do we use it? We use it basically for skill performance and ultimately to improve skill performance. So some of the cool things about it are you can learn skills without going through the physical fatigue and the physical breakdown. So if you went out and, worked on 200 penalty kicks at some point in time, like your legs might get super duper sore and you might not be able to perform, in the game the next day that you at the level you would want to because you're so tired. So you get to go through some of this learning, the learning process and just the repetition process without practicing a skill in person. This does not necessarily mean that you should not still practice your skills in person. You should always still do that, but this is just the additional work outside of practice that should help your performance and practice in games improve. So a mental rep equals improved execution. Each time you mentally perform a rep, like we talked about, it strengthens that neural pathway in your brain. So being able to go through multiple reps will help that help you improve your execution of that skill when you need it the most. It forces you to focus on one task. Or in the beginning phases of learning how to do visualization, like we keep things pretty simple so that you can build that skill. If you think back to your early days in soccer, you had to learn to dribble and pass before you could work on complex offense and defense skills and plans. So it forces you to focus on those simple tasks. As your visualization skills get better, just like when your dribbling and passing got better, you were able to do more on the field. So you'll be able to focus even more on the combining a lot of skills at one time that you're visualizing. Sorry. So it gives you an opportunity for extra practice additionally. You can only put in so much physical practice. Oh, there's chats there. Sorry, now I'm seeing it. Okay. So you can only put in so much time physically practicing, to avoid injury and everything like that. This gives you an opportunity to get more reps of more skills actually away from the practice field to ultimately help you improve your skill on the field. There you go. Like we mentioned, it forms mental pathways for new skills, and then it can prepare you for new possibilities on the field. So if you think about some of the more complex positions that you might find yourself in that are sometimes hard to recreate in practice, you can recreate those in your mind so that when it comes time in a game, you've already gone through that a few times. If there's opportunities for you to create those things physically in practice, absolutely that can help. But this is just another way to run through different reps of different positions you might find yourself in games, and so just to get you as ready as possible. The reason this slide is in blocks is these are just the foundational pieces. So think about these as more like building blocks. And so as you learn, as you focus on specific small tasks, as you practice them, it basically builds you up to a point where you have those stronger mental pathways, and then it prepares you for more opportunities on the field. Okay, so how do I do this? This sounds cool. Like, I have the ability to get better by, times when I'm sitting at home. I would imagine right now practices, if you're even practicing, I don't know, but things probably look very different right now than they have in the past, just because of what's going on in the world right now. So this is a perfect time and opportunity to be able to use some of these skills to help prepare you for being back on the field when things get back to some sort of normal. So how do you do it? You start with your 5 senses. We all learn these pretty early in school, and they're actually pretty simple, but it's more just to give you the ideas of, like, when you're seeing things, hearing things, tasting, you're like, what does taste mean? How do I visualize taste on the soccer field? Let's go through these for a moment, just so you have some ideas for when you are writing your own imagery script at the end of this. So sight, what do you see? Do you see, is the field empty? Are you playing in a game that has, stands and fans? Is it, parents and coaches lining the sides of the fields? Like, what does it look like? What does your environment look like? What do you hear? Do you hear your coach talking to you? Do you hear, your own breathing happening? Do you hear your teammates yelling for you? Do you hear the crunch of the grass under your feet, or the turf? The turf sounds different than grass when you walk on it. Like, what actually are you listening, or can you hear when you're in the moment performing a skill? What do you taste? Are you sweating? Is it salty when you lick your lips? Sometimes I feel like you can, when you smell something so much, you almost taste it. Like, is the grass freshly cut and you can taste that too? Do you typically, drink a certain Gatorade, at halftime, and you still have that taste in your mouth? Like, what do you taste in that moment of the skill, in the skill that you're working on? Touch, what does it feel like? What does it feel like when your feet are contacting the ground and you're running? What does it feel like when you're pushing off pretty hard with your toes to sprint to get across the field really quick? What does it feel like when the ball is passed to you and you have to slow it down, and almost accept it without it bouncing super far off your foot? What does it feel like when, you're taking a shot and you make contact with your foot and there might be some vibration running up your leg? Like, those are the types of feels that I want you to think about. And like I mentioned earlier, what is it like? What are some smells that you experience in that moment? Freshly cut grass, is a concession stand cooking something? Have you been out there running for a while and you're starting, to smell your own body? Like, what smells are happening in that moment? Our goal with using imagery is to make it as real as possible. And so the way we do that is using our 5 senses to make it as real as possible. The one other thing I would typically throw in would be emotion. Like, if you're visualizing something that is that's in the game at a certain point, like, do you feel your adrenaline rushing? Like, if you can inject emotion into this, the better. So the more real you can make it, the more your mind and body start to work together to lay down those neural connections. So the how-tos. So there's different types of visualization. So mastery is when you visualize yourself doing something exactly perfectly with nothing going wrong. I have start with mastery with the little lightning bolt here, because we want you to start with mastery. It's harder to develop, the harder skills if you don't have the foundational skills. So this is very similar. So visualizing everything that is happening 100% perfect, the way you would want the full outcome to look, is a great place to start. Once you feel like you have that down, moving into what we call anticipatory or preparatory visualization. This is when you put yourself in position. Say, you missed a pass or you missed something on the field. And yeah, it's not ideal, but sometimes it happens. putting yourself in that position to figure out how you're going to get out of that and get yourself back into the game. We don't like to say, hey, visualize yourself missing if you're taking a shot on goal. Like, we don't ask you to visualize yourself missing something like that, because your body remembers that. We want you to visualize those kind of things as completely successful. But if there's like challenging situations that you find yourself on the field, or you're going in, for a tackle, like, what are the challenging things that might happen, and how can you work mentally to figure out how to get yourself out of those situations, so that when you find yourself that way on the field, you're more likely to be successful in that situation. Secondly, we talk about open and closed skills. So closed skills, I have all the variables stay the same. That's basically where you are in full control. Some sports have a lot more closed skills than others. Soccer, I don't feel like has that many closed skills, but taking, a penalty kick, it's you and the ball. Obviously, you don't have control over what the goalie's doing, but the closed skills are where you are in complete control. And so we like to say start with those, because those are obviously easier to imagine and start to experience. Open skills, that's more of like a situational play when there's a lot of different players on the field that are moving. Those are a little bit tougher to imagine and visualize because so much is changing. But as you gain comfort and confidence in going through the basic closed skills, it's much easier to move into those open or changing and complex variables to prepare for games and competition. So let me go back. There's a few things in the chat. Let me just check it real quick. Yes, somebody asked, is it good when you use this in, oh wait, maybe I missed that. Hold on. Can we use visualization? Somebody asked, can we use visualizations for every skill to help us? Yes. The chances are you absolutely can. Depending on, some people, like speakers that speak in front of thousands of people, they use it as well. It doesn't just have to be around sports. So if there's certain things in your sport that you're like, hey, I want to work on this particular skill, use it for that. If there's, things at school, whenever we get back to normal and you're going back to school and you have to do big projects or presentations, these kind of things can help with those as well. Let me see. Okay, I think that was pretty much the only question so far. But moving on, I put this, I guess, acronym in, and the two individuals that developed it, because when you start to write your own visualization scripts, it kind of gives you a guide. So when we talked earlier about obviously your senses and where they come in, this is the other part that helps guide you into basically writing the best script that you can possibly write for yourself and the most real script. So when you're thinking about it, so the physical part, that could be a variety of different things. Sometimes what we talk about is when you visualize yourself, see yourself in your team uniform. If you wear different colors for different games, like whatever color is, whatever uniform you're gonna wear in the next upcoming game, like see yourself in that. See yourself, going through the warm-ups with your teammates nearby. If it's a field that or I guess the environment piece is, if it's a field that has, stands or multiple fields next to it, like whatever that looks like, try and make it as real as you possibly can. Obviously, if it's a skill that does not, necessarily happen on the soccer field and it's for a different sport, think about obviously that court or that field that you would be on for that sport. What's the task? When you're visualizing yourself performing the task, you want to make sure it is within your skill set or just a little bit above. So if you're more of a beginner with soccer, you don't necessarily want to visualize, some of the professional soccer players and you doing skills comparable to them. You want to work towards whatever those next skills are that you need to get along the way. And so making sure the task is within your skill set. We got a couple questions here, so I thought I would take a moment and take a look at that for a second. Okay, we will come back to that. So the timing, when you are thinking through whatever skill situation that you have in your mind, you want to make it in as real time as possible. So sometimes we think of things at slower speeds, but when you're thinking about it in your mind, you want to think about it in real time. The one time that this is different is if it's a super specific small task that you're struggling with physically. You might want to go through a stepwise progression of thinking about it in the most the slower is at a slower speed, and then as you get that skill, then speed it up. But if you're thinking about like times in a game, you want to make sure you're thinking about it through real time. The learning piece, as you continue to build this skill, you want to keep progressing. So once you've mastered something basic and physically on the field you've mastered it, you want to keep moving on to tougher skills for you to continue to practice, so that you're not still thinking about some of the easier things that you've already practiced. So making sure it's a continual process. The emotion piece, like we mentioned before, as much emotion that you can put into the skill or the situation, knowing how you feel internally when you're playing in certain games, or the first half versus the second half. You want to make sure you get as much of that emotion into that imaginary state as possible. And then perspective, like we mentioned earlier. Are you seeing yourself in first person, like you are using your eyes and you're moving towards the goal like we did, or towards the goal like we did in the beginning? Or are you standing on the side watching your physical body move towards the goal? So kind of keeping that in mind, it's important to know what works best for you. Okay, so how do you write your own script? So like I mentioned earlier, what we did in the start, so our dynamic warm-up, was basically a simple imagery script, just to give you a taste of what it looks like and what it feels like. It's important for it to be in your own words. And so if it's something specific to you, using your words, you can write it out, you can record yourself so that you can just listen to your own voice and walk through it. If you write it out and you read through it a couple of times and you're like, hey, I've got it in my mind, I don't need to listen to it, I can talk myself through it. Everybody does it a little differently. Sometimes if it's more of a team skill, it might be coach taking you through it, and you being able to walk through whatever the situation is that coach describes. But these are some options to write it out so that you're hitting all the points using your senses, whatever the task is, knowing the environment you're performing in. And then, like I mentioned, some people do really well with being able to listen to it. And so you can write it, you can record it on your phone, and then you have it with you. If you're, on the way to practice, on the way to a game, you can listen to it to walk yourself through it. Okay, so some key points. Imagery and visualization it's pretty complex, but I tried to make it as straightforward as I possibly could, just to break it down into the steps. So some things to think about. When you're starting, you want to start with trying to do it less than 10 minutes a day. We all have attention spans that probably are not nearly as long as we might think they are. So it's not uncommon to start and you see yourself on the field, you're seeing yourself moving with the ball, and then all of a sudden you're daydreaming. That's normal, and don't stress about that if that happens to you. So that's why we like to say start with shorter time frames. Until your body gets used to doing it. And then if you want to build on time, you're welcome to. But some people are like, oh, I didn't do it the last 3 days. I should just do 30 minutes today to make up for it. And that's not necessarily as beneficial. So even if it's, 2 or 3 minutes to start with, that's still good. Be patient with yourself. All skills obviously take time. You probably didn't get to where you are on the soccer field right now, overnight. Like that took a lot of hours of practice for you to get where you are. So be patient with yourself. It does take time, but the more you do it, typically the easier it gets for you. The earlier in the day you do it, the better, just simply because of how the brain begins to wake up in the morning. The earlier, the better, but really any time is better than not doing it at all. Sorry. Remembering your senses, like we talked about, your taste, your smell, your vision, integrate that as much as you possibly can, and then put emotion in. You want to know how your body's going to feel in that moment. And then, like I talked about earlier, start with simple tasks that are in your control and then build from there. Just for consistency purposes, shoot for the same time every day. Right now, I know all of our schedules are probably not what they used to be a month ago. So now might be a great time just to integrate a new pattern for how, or a new schedule for yourself. And then when you do get back to practice or getting back to some kind of normal life, sometimes that you might think about using this is if your parents are driving you to practice, during warm-ups or stretching, just running through a few things in your mind. If you're traveling, going to games, that's another great time. Even just before you go to bed. Sometimes I've heard people tell me that, laying in bed before you go to bed is one of the best times because they're settled for the day and they can take their time with it. Whatever works for you, a little bit goes a long way. So looking back, I think I hit each of these, but if I didn't, please send more messages. I'll go through those here in a minute and we can answer anything else that you all have sent. Just some ideas of advantages for using this for soccer players is you can do it anywhere. It's obviously super flexible. Like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't necessarily replace any of your physical training. You still need that as well, but you can do this without leading to additional fatigue. So you can actually get a little bit more practice and preparation, even without the wear and tear on your body. And then finally, you can create any situation in your mind. So things that might be tougher to set up in practice, you can set those up in your mind to be even more prepared for those on the field. So right now, while I'm taking a moment to look at the questions, I want you all to think about, write down, come up with in your mind, what are 3 things that you feel like you can take away from this time that I've had with you all and that you can start to apply pretty soon. Let me just look at questions. So, okay, so there's a great question. What do you recommend for someone who literally cannot visualize a successful play? In other words, when you only visualize making a shot or missing a shot or making a mistake, that is actually not uncommon. What we would say, or what I would say, is go back to the basics. Literally stand in front of the goal, see the ball, make contact with your foot, see it go into the net and stop. and literally just pause at that point. A lot of negativity that we experience actually comes from what we see ourselves doing. And so the huge goal with visualization is to start setting up those positive pathways in our brain. So if it is an athlete that really struggles, I would make it as simple as possible. I've also had experience where athletes have trouble visualizing in their sport. So even just to say, hey, take yourself out to your favorite park and, see what the park looks like, where the trees are. Take yourself through a walk in the park. That way it's completely separate from sport. If there's some form of, mental block or negative thought about performance, that's another option, is using these same skills but taking it out of the sport realm. Let's see. Is it better to do it right before a game or another time? What would you recommend? I would actually recommend both, because like I said, it's a skill that just needs the repetition and the practice. So I would still obviously encourage right before a game, but in order to be able to tap into the resources in your mind right before a game, you actually need to have some practice of these skills beforehand. So it doesn't necessarily have to be every single day. Even if you have 2 or 3 minutes here, 2 or 3 minutes there, that builds up, just seeing yourself doing things successfully. So I guess to answer that question, I would actually recommend both. The next question is, what do you recommend for someone who has an attention span of 2 seconds? Start with 2 seconds. We all, especially in today's day and age, we all have very, very minimal attention spans. But if you can literally start with 2 seconds, if you think back to the dynamic warm-up that I did with you all, it may have been see yourself on the field, literally starting there. And then, as the days pass and you get used to thinking about things one at a time, you can start to put them together. But that is a challenge early on, is that the slowing your mind down, slowing your body down to actually think about these things can be tough. So if you have 2 seconds, start with 2 seconds. Next. Do you recommend visualization to increase closer to game day competition or keep it consistent? I would say keep it consistent, but as game day and competition nears, if there's ways to make your visualization training more specific to whatever that competition is, I would suggest that's when you make that shift of some of the basic skills you're doing, or basic situations. You can make those obviously more real time, knowing exactly what that competition location, whatever team you're playing, you can probably make it a little bit more specific. Let's see. Can I talk briefly about why this works? Absolutely. There's, like I mentioned earlier, there's a couple theories, scientific theories, that they have done a lot of research on in terms of how the brain and the body are connected, and through those psychoneuromuscular pathways. Just like practicing the skills that we practice on a daily basis to get the reps in. Some people call it muscle memory. This is actually helping you develop some of that muscle memory before you actually physically perform the skill. So I guess on the scientific level, it's more of the connections within how the brain and the body talk back and forth. That would be, I guess, the way I would describe it from that perspective. The other way is what you see in your mind. Typically, you're more likely to actually see that skill happen in front of you, and it almost prepares your brain for what the physical component is that's coming. Let's see. Where did we go? Okay, why would you recommend, or would you recommend doing it in class? I'm not sure if we're talking school class or in groups. I think it's easier to do in groups that are all working towards the same goal. So if it's in a class, it might be tougher if everyone isn't necessarily working towards the same goal. But if you're in a group of people where everyone is working towards the same thing, I think it's definitely definitely something that can be used there. If it's more in the class setting of just teaching it, absolutely, everybody can benefit from the skill. So if it's simply just teaching the skill to a class, I think that's totally reasonable. If you're going to take someone through like a formal imagery script, keeping it consistent with what the group's goal is would be more beneficial. Let's see. Okay. Once you get the reps in, is this something that can be useful during a game to reset or recover after a mistake? Yes, that is actually a huge component of when this can be so effective. So yeah, just resetting, and you can't obviously fix the past. So in that moment, seeing exactly how you want it to happen next, definitely. The other, I guess the other good thing is if you've already had a practice of this consistently, it's probably easier to tap into what those thoughts are in that pressure-filled moment, rather than trying to tap into it if you haven't done the reps. So that would be a great time to use this, especially in the moment, when you need to reset and refocus and move on from whatever just happened. Okay. Let me re-scroll through and make sure I didn't miss anyone's questions. Oh, here we go. I missed this one. I apologize. Would VR training be a useful visualization tool? Yes, those two things can get used, and they do get used actually on a regular basis. So if there's some kind of VR training that you're using, to be able to use that, and then if there's ways for your athletes to, in their mind, see it again after they do that VR training, yes, that would be great. There's a few more coming in. Here we go. Sorry, I missed this one. What do you recommend for number of times per weekday, month to do visualization, and does it ramp up closer to the game or done all the time? Even just starting a couple days a week, just to get used to it. I don't know, you don't want to necessarily change big things, so you don't want to add a lot of things right before big games or competitions. That's why if you're doing 3 days a week, stick with 3 or 4 days a week before a competition. And obviously, but if you could, like I mentioned earlier, if you can make it more specific to what that competition is, that's even more successful. Okay. I think I at least caught. Okay, here we go. Oh, no, we just did that one. Sorry. If you can't visualize in real time, should you still do it? Yes, absolutely. Some things happen really quick. And in order to see some of those things, you may need to slow it down for what works for you. So yes, it's still beneficial. I will say the one thing I do want you to keep in mind is it's not necessarily a right way or a wrong way to do it. Everybody usually has their own kind of their own way of doing it, but the foundational components around it just give you guidance to make it to whatever works best for you. So absolutely, if real time is tough, slow motion might be better. If slow motion is tough, real time might be better. It's whatever works for you. Somebody asked, is it good to visualize right before bed? Yep, that is totally fine. Um, if it's something that you feel like would cause if it's something that you feel like is good and it relaxes you and it doesn't put you in a more like anxious state, if it's something that you feel like what might make you anxious, I might not do it right before bed. But if it's something that you feel like you can do it and still mentally shut down and go to sleep, then absolutely. If that's the only time that you have quiet during the day, take advantage of it. Should we practice using visualization in every situation or in certain things? If you can think about, I wouldn't start with every situation. Like we mentioned earlier, the more complex the situation, the tougher it is to think about. But as you get better at it, you can think about more complex situations. So I would start with the basics. I don't know exactly what you mean with certain things, whether it's skills or plays or how to defend a certain player. I would like to think you could use it all the time. I mean, there's a lot of business professionals that use this stuff on a daily basis in preparation for big presentations or speeches. So that's why I'm like, it can be used outside of just, oh, sports or school. Perfect. Thank you. Yes, it can be used for, I would say, school and sports. Anything that's a performance. A lot of what we do in life is a performance, whether it's, going to school, performing presentations at school, or taking tests, or anything like that. It's anything that you have to perform in. It's a great tool to use to prepare yourself for that. Sending a link. I'm not sure how to do that, but I will check with someone on our side of things, and we will hopefully figure that out for you. Someone asked if I could send the link of the recording. Does visualization affect you more in certain times? I don't know necessarily. I think a lot of it is just how your brain interprets it and how positive you can, or how successful you can make it in your mind and fully feel it, to be able to see if it works. Sorry, I missed that one. So in terms of certain times versus other times, I would like to say it's in most times, but yeah, I guess and like someone mentioned earlier, if it's a resetting tool after a mistake, or almost like to prepare you for whatever play you're getting ready to go out and run, that might be an even better time for you. Somebody asked how can you stay focused if you get easily distracted? Start small. Just start with the super simple tasks, one at a time. I will say I am human just like all of us, and early on it is really hard. If I am trying to go through something on my own in my mind, it's easy to get distracted. I think sometimes when it's written out or you're listening to it, it makes it a little bit easier to not get so distracted, or it kind of resets you to bring you back when you do get distracted. So I would start small. I would try writing it out, reading it to yourself. If you feel like reading it is harder for you to interpret, I would record yourself saying it and then listen to it. And even if it's listening to it in chunks, just because you get so distracted, that's totally fine too. Let's see. Can you do it on the bench? Of course, absolutely. You really can do it anywhere. even if, sitting there closing your eyes is not ideal, just simply looking down, eyes are completely open or looking wherever you need to look. You can think about whatever that picture is in your mind. So yes, you can absolutely do it on the bench. And if you know you're getting ready to go in and you have to be prepared to execute a certain skill, that would be a great time to do it. So yeah, you can absolutely do it on the bench. Somebody asked, how can you utilize this as a team to deal with tough circumstances like being down in the game and try and lift them back up as a team? I'm thinking of that more as like the motivational piece or the pep talk piece. Even somebody taking a moment and each athlete being able to think of whatever their highlight reel is. Most athletes at some point have been like, I was able to complete this skill at this time, and it was great. Whether it was in practice, whether it was in a game, like everyone has those ideas in their head of when sometime you were able to produce that successful skill. And even if the team's struggling and given the kids, literally 10 or 15 seconds to say, hey, what in your mind have you done in the past that has been super successful, and what did that look like? Or what in your mind would you like it to look like? Like you scoring the winning goal, even if it might not be directly impactful in that moment, just to give everyone that positive. It's really just a positive and confidence builder of what you have done in the past that is you're so capable of doing. But also, if you go out there and you have the ball in your foot, like put it in the goal. I know it's easier said than done sitting here than it is on the game or on the sidelines during a game. But I guess that would be possibly a way to integrate this into those more of those motivational times, or when everybody's down and they need a little help coming back. Is it good if we already started practicing the skill? Absolutely. That's awesome. You already have those reps in. I mean, it's like you've already put time in on the field practicing a physical skill that you've done on the field so many times. Absolutely. Congratulations for being ahead of a lot of us to be able to think about doing this already. Keep up the good work. Keep doing it. Build on, maybe hopefully you may have learned a thing or two today that you can use in your visualization practices moving forward. Somebody asks, can doing this help with memorizing something? I would imagine so. I can't say that I've seen research on that specifically, but I would imagine so. Simply, if it's something that you have to memorize and perform, I think the performance piece is the part that might be the kicker. If it's something you have to memorize and perform in front of class, you can see yourself actually performing that speech or whatever it is you're memorizing. I don't know if the memorization part that in this question is about like memorizing formulas for a test, or if it's more of memorizing something else. But if you can see yourself performing whatever you're memorizing, I would say that's when you would probably see the most benefit from this. Somebody asked, can you do it when you are a goalie, or should you pay attention to the game? Obviously, always paying attention to the game is important. I think I've never been a goalie, but from observation, there's times when the teams or when all the players are on the other side of the field and you have a moment. I'm not saying check out of that moment, like stay present in that moment, but still being able to, think about, if somebody comes and they look like they're shooting, this is like to your right, like how are you going to move? You can absolutely think of that, but obviously when the ball crosses midfield and it's coming your way, being able to click back into this moment would be super important. Somebody said they have been doing this 5 minutes before every game. That's awesome. Congratulations. That is super encouraging to know that some people have already been working on some of this. If it doesn't have a name, but whoever said that, if there's things that you have learned over the times that you've done this that you can share with your teammates, I think that would be awesome. You know, you learn a lot by doing it, and we all figure out what works for us, and there's some things that are great and that help you do it, and there's some things that just don't work for you. And so if whoever said that is able to share with others on his or her team what works for them, that might be a great way to help some of your teammates be able to I guess catch up and start using this a little bit more. So that was Zane, apparently. Okay, so does everyone have 3 things in their mind or written down that they feel like they can take away from today and either use tonight or use when they get back to practice? If you do, I hope you have those written down so that you can refer back to those notes at some point in time. Let's see. So with that, all I had was if there were any more questions. Well, we are like right on 5 o'clock. That was pretty good. Good job, y'all. So if y'all have questions, additional questions that come up, this is my email. I would be more than happy to answer more questions as you go, or if coaches would like additional resources, I could easily provide those for you as well. So with that, thank you all for this opportunity. I hope you learned something. If not, forget it. It's okay. But if you can incorporate some of this into daily life or into practices, I think you'll be shocked to see how much your performance can improve. So with that, thank you, everyone. I hope y'all have a wonderful night and stay safe out there.
Thank you, Mimi.